this is a bioweapon operation. It was not merely money. Unfortunately, looking at the evidence, there's a lot of things they were doing by design. Now, they're not killing everyone. That would be too obvious. It'd be, a clear crime. But they can kill enough people in vulnerable groups where folks are noticing it, but the general population seems not to notice. But in addition, the mandates accomplished a lot in terms of training us to submit to irrational orders. This operation had a lot of purposes. I think it's increasing disability. It's increasing deaths. It's discouraging a lot of people. It increased suicides. It trained people. It got them to be able to see who's objecting and who's going along and so forth. And you could see, based on the doctors who went along with this, who is either gullible or naively just blindly following, which is uncharacteristic of a doctor. You're supposed to look for data. You're supposed to look at the justification for these orders. You don't just blindly prescribe something. You find out what the benefits and risks are. Some of the doctors might have been part of the operation. I suspect some were. The ones who attacked us on Twitter very early on for pointing out what the peer-reviewed literature said about the spike protein. All these doctors come out attacking. And there was even some doctor who was reporting everyone to the board who objected to, had any questions about the vaccine. You had to just keep your mouth shut or you're going to get reported to the board. It was incredible.
You are listening to the Dr. Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So, if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or his Substack. Or simply buy him a coffee with a one-off donation, links to which can be found at drmalik.com. Now, let's get on with the show.
Right, Dr. James Hill. Listen, it's really nice to chat to you. Nothing changes. I've hit the record button. We're chatting. But listen, I want to start off by asking you, why are you standing by Israel with this war against Iran? Why are you supporting... Oh, sorry. I've got the wrong guest. No, James, it's funny. I have asked so many Zionists on the show to come and debate with me. And they're very similar to those who are pro-vaccines. All the pro-vaccine doctors? When I approached them, the Zionists and the pro-vaccine doctors, and I say, look, come on my show and tell me, why do you have this position? Have a debate with me. Have a chat with me. Heck, just air your thoughts and I'll go easy on you. And guess what? It's tumbleweed silence.
Right. Yeah, and it strikes me that if one opposes certain things that America's doing or questions Israel on certain things, you're immediately characterized as anti-Semitic when in actuality you just have questions or you don't understand something or you find certain news reports objectionable. And it's very similar to the anti-vax label where if all you do is question one vaccine or one ingredient, you're immediately labeled by many an anti-vaxxer, which is a way of sort of just labeling and diminishing that way. And it has a psychological effect on a lot of people to say, oh, I better not be anti-vax. I better just embrace everything called a vaccine. So it's quite a psychological trick. Okay.
So are you telling me you don't say hi Hitler every night? And you don't have a Nazi uniform under your bed?
Never.
But yeah, in all seriousness, I mean, that's what it is. It's that, when you want to have that debate, you're an anti-vaxxer. When you want to say, yeah, why is there so many dual citizens in the American government? Doesn't matter if it's, Democrat or Republican with Israel flags outside their Congress offices. That's a bit weird. And it's anti-Semitic. And it's any other country, if that had that relationship with government, I mean, forget Muslim countries. Okay. By the way, I'm not a Muslim anymore. I gave that up a very long time ago, but people assume with my name that I am. I'm not. But Muslims nowadays have a very bad name. So even though I gave that up 15 years ago, I still get, oh, you're a Muslim in disguise. But forget Muslim countries. Imagine you had a nice, beautiful country like Greece. Who doesn't like Greece? Greek food, Greek music, it's lovely. Now imagine 2/3 of the US government had dual citizenship with Greece. You'd be kind of like, wow, that's interesting. You'd be like, you would say that's a bit weird. Or let's take, Chile or Argentina, the tango, right? 2/3 of the cabinet are dual citizens with Argentinian. You'd be like, wow, that's really odd. But when it comes to Israel, it's like, no, that's not odd. Are you anti-Semitic? Like, why are you even asking that? Why are you even saying that? Well, because it's weird. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. And I should say that just in case people don't know, we both have tons of Jewish colleagues and friends and people in my family. So I love Jewish people. I love Israeli people. This is not them that we're talking about. This is something I write about on Substack, which is, and I'll use the term redacted so that there's no sort of censorship on this, I hope. But redacted military intelligence, who's the one that's doing certain things like false flag events or 9/11, not the average person of any group, not the average Muslim or Christian or Jewish person. It's this redacted military intelligence, which after understanding 9/11, which took me years to find the right people who were researching this and could explain it and show data evidencing that redacted military intelligence is behind 9/11, I realized as soon as the pandemic was declared and they instantly went to masking and lockdowns and mandatory vaccines that they were behind this too. And they're apparently the only ones with the power to be able to control the narrative in the media and to control enough members of Congress and the mayors and governors in the US to go along with these things. There's really no other group or that kind of power can be manifest. It's sort of like, and also the fact that all these countries were coordinated. Every country with the global lockdowns had 5 stages, so this was all pre-planned, and very few groups had that kind of power. Of course, money means a lot. Like people talk about Bill Gates and Klaus Schwab and the WEF, but you look at who's behind those groups, and it sort of leads you back to this sort of military intelligence outfit. And from at least before 9/11 that they were controlling the U.S. Department of Defense. You have a lot of people who have come out and shown that the Department of Defense was behind the COVID operation in terms of launching the vaccines and so forth. And Sasha Latypova and Catherine Watt have done a good job researching this and finding the laws they set up over the course of years to make these things possible, these restrictions of our liberties possible. And then you ask, okay, it's the Department of Defense, so who is it? Is it just Mark Milley or these kinds of generals? No, if you look at what General Wesley Clark said after 9/11, it was a foreign government controlling this. And this idea after 9/11 of defeating 7 countries in 5 years, they're the ones who are controlling this. It's the best of my ability to see it, and I'm always open to other theories, but, if you just look at the evidence, that's what we're seeing. And so any time there's a restriction of our liberties, whether it's through one of these hate speech laws or another lockdown or another curfew, I look directly to that group because they're the ones who never object in the media, or they may control a group that does object, but they'll instantly steer you away from who's behind it. One example is in the so-called anti-vaccine movement, you have a lot of people who will tell you, oh, you have to watch out for certain vaccines, but everybody's trying hard. All the officials are really doing their best. They just made a mistake. These vaccines ended up being harmful, but it was never by intent. And that just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I mean, I think that a lot of these operations are intended to harm or intended to take away liberties, like First Amendment rights to free speech, Second Amendment rights to keep and bear arms here in the U.S. And those tend to be the folks behind it. And so I know it's risky to talk about, but I think it's important so people can see what's going on the next time one of these pandemics is declared or next time a vaccine's mandated. They can stop and think, who's doing this? Is this really in my best interest? Are these really health officials who want my family to be healthy when they lock us down for 2 years and our business is lost and I'm fired from my job? So, that's kind of a focus that I tend to write about a fair amount.
Well, James, it's a very difficult topic to even begin to talk about, and I really struggle. And I get attacked because I say, look, it's not the Jews. It's very wrong to say that. I know Jewish friends. I've had one on my show, Gavin Silverman. He tells me it's all bullshit. It's Israel. It's Netanyahu. It's all the Zionists. He's Jewish. And you just need to look at the Jewish students in America protesting. Their sit-downs and everything. They're like, not in our name. No thanks. You got Dan Cohen. He's Jewish. Done a great documentary of killing Gaza and speaks out every day about what's going on. Says this is a joke. I'm an American. Don't tell me that I can only belong to Israel. That in itself is an anti-Semitic. Zionism is anti-Semitic. I've spoken to Rabbi Weiss. He said the same thing. Amy Lansky, Lawrence Palavetsky. I mean, he said something really weird to me on the podcast once. He goes, "I'm a proper Jew," and I was like, "What does that even mean?" He goes, "I'm a real Jew." I was like, what does that mean? Like, what other types of Jews are there? It's like I don't like. Is Jew mean that your ethnicity, race, color, religion, culture? Like, well, what is it? It doesn't even. I don't even know what it means. But I do know that there are good Jewish people out there, and there's good Muslims out there, and there's good Christians out there. But I also know that there's a lot of bad people in all of these groups, and it's never the whole group. So right now in the UK, we've got a problem with Pakistani grooming gangs. My family's Pakistani origin. I was born in Scotland to Pakistani parents. I don't know any Pakistanis that go around raping and pillaging and everything, no thanks, or grooming young kids. But there's an issue, but that doesn't mean it's all the Pakistanis.
Absolutely.
It means there's a problem, but there is a problem in a subset of Pakistanis targeting young girls, particularly white girls. And that has to be spoken about. But it's been covered up in the UK. And the politicians didn't want to talk about it. And when you do that, you have a problem that festers. And then you get true racial hatred because, the white people naturally will be like, well, why are you covering up and defending these assholes who are, raping our young girls? Like, why do they get special treatment? So then everybody gets tainted with the same brush when actually you should put a spotlight on there and go, that's wrong, right? I've got Pakistani origin in me, not in my name. Thank you very much. And every single one of those guys should be castrated and fed their own testicles, frankly. You need to call out your own group. Like as a doctor, I call out the doctors who push the jab. Now, a lot of doctors say to me, we can't talk, it's not good to talk about your colleagues and blah. No, it is actually when you see something wrong in your group, and it's going to be professional, religious, ethnic, whatever, football team, soccer team. If you see something in your group that's not right, I think it's really important the rest of us say, hey, that's not good. That's not representative of us or me. But we've got this climate where you can't do that. And a lot of Pakistanis in the UK go, hush, hush. Oh, no, we can't talk about this. It'll bring sharm. Sharm means shame. We can't talk about this because it'll bring shame. Well, yes, it's even more shameful to stay quiet about it. So when you censor and do this, you just create a bigger problem further down the road. And I actually think true anti-Semitism is when you cannot question people who claim to be Jewish. And I say the word claim because I think some of them, it's very dubious whether they are Jewish at all. Certainly, they're not Jewish from the Middle East. They're Eastern European descent and whatnot. But some of them might even be satanic. A lot of them even say they're atheists or agnostic or whatever. These Jews, that so-called Jews, if they're doing something fundamentally against humanity and even their core values of their religion, and I think all religions have good core values, then I think it's important that us and Jews themselves say, hey, this is all wrong. But now we live in an era where it's just anti-Semitism. I'm passionate about it, and I'm going to let you talk in a second, because I don't know if you know this, but the final nail in the coffin of my career was when I was reported to the hospital management and said, oh, Ahmed Malik has had Ava Bartlett on the podcast, and she claimed that there's some Israeli officials who want to ethnically cleanse Gaza, which is factually correct. And because Ahmed's done this, and we were worried that he's anti-Semitic, so I was suspended for 5 months. Oh. And they did an investigation, and they cleared me and said, no, we went through all of his podcasts. He's not anti-Semitic. He's very fair. He's very, very balanced. But that was, that was that was the final nail in the coffin. When you've just been expelled from your main place of work, transferred your patients, the waiting list, everything, explained to all your patients, apologize. It's embarrassing. Yeah, I don't work there anymore. You're going to have to move 30 miles for your operation. And then a few weeks later, you get suspended again. And now you're having to tell all your patients that you've just moved and transferred. By the way, now I've got another hospital that suspended me, and I'm sorry, I don't know when that'll be that I can come back and get. They kind of go, what's wrong with you, doc? Like, what's happening? And I knew the writing was on the wall. And at that point, I handed back my license. But the anti-Semitism card, so I've been accused of an anti-vaxxer, transphobic, and anti-Semitic, climate change denier. So the anti-Semitic thing was the final thing that destroyed my 25-year very successful career. So I'm quite passionate about this for that reason, because I'm not anti-Semitic. But when I see something that's wrong, we need to talk about it. But the card comes out anti-Semitic. And I think that's very dangerous.
Very dangerous. I'm so sorry to hear that happen to you. But, you mentioned some of the Jewish people who have come out and gone against what's happening with this war in Iran. I just saw an interview last night with Jeffrey Sachs, the Columbia University economics professor.
On Tucker Carlson?
This one was not, but he has, he's done good interviews. He said, I know there's some issues with what he did around 1990 when the fall of the Berlin Wall, and he went into the Soviet Union with a bunch of other Harvard economists and sort of restructured things. And there's accusations that they pulled money out illegally. So I don't know much about that. But on this issue, I think he made a great point last night when he said, what's going on with this war in Iran has nothing to do with Jewish values. Because they said, you're Jewish, aren't you? And how do you defend this? And he said, it's indefensible. I can't say that just going to war with Iran, especially when Iran said that they want to negotiate with the U.S. and come to a peace agreement, and that was just disregarded. So, it's an important point that this is not real Jewish values any more than the Pakistani grooming gangs are Muslim value. It's just not at all.
Or Pakistani values. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And you mentioned what's going on in the UK with censorship. I was just hearing that Keir Starmer was sort of brought in to reverse Brexit and try to get the UK back into the EU. And, he has all these censorship laws that he's promoting, and including if you criticize any aspect of immigration, including the grooming gangs, they'll put you in jail for a Facebook post or what have you. This is outrageous. And this is the direction they want to take the U.S. in. Thankfully, we have a First Amendment, and we have some federal judges who will uphold it. And I hope and pray that the Supreme Court will continue to do that as they have for, 200 years plus. But it's concerning because these anti-Semitism laws, for example, are in something like 38 states. And they say, for example, and they include the anti-BDS laws, where if any state employee says, I don't want to purchase from Israel, they're removed from state contracts. And you may have heard recently, there was a town in Texas, I think it's San Marcos, a little town, that found that something like $10 or $20 million a year of their local taxes were going to Israel. And they said, we'd rather spend that here at home on schools and roads and infrastructure. And the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, said, no, you can't do that. You must continue sending this money to Israel. And if you don't do it, it's anti-Semitic. And there's no room for anti-Semitism in Texas. So this is the state we're in. I mean, I know tons of Texas people. My sister lives there and her family. there's no anti-Semitism in anyone I've ever seen from Texas. But this idea that if you oppose anything along these lines, you're automatically anti-Semitic is a devastating blow. And as it was for you, it's just, it's extreme. And the same thing, like you mentioned, with being called a climate denier. I mean, there's serious questions about the climate models and whether they incorporate negative feedbacks adequately, which it appears they don't.
The influence of the sun?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, the sun is hard to model. Clouds are very hard to model. And so the minute you say, well, let's look at this, as some people have, like Willie Soon from Harvard, he was a climate scientist there for, I think it was 30 years. And Richard Lindzen at MIT, who was head of atmospheric sciences at MIT for over 30 years, they said, no, these assumptions are incorrect. And the models, our predictions of climate change depend on these models, and the models are inaccurate. They're based on some false assumptions or some shaky assumptions, and also on some improper processing of the data into predictions. So, but if you say anything, you're labeled a climate denier, and you could lose your job, or you could, these things are awful, and I hope they are getting reversed. You see some of the DEI things in the U.S. being reversed. Trump's trying to do that. But I don't know if you also heard recently, it came out that during the Biden administration, there was a law that was going to forgive 120% of all farmers' loans on their farms, only if they were non-white. And so in other words, if you owed $1 million on your farm, you could get that all paid off by the U.S. government, plus get another $200,000 in your pocket, but only if you were Black, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American, and whites were excluded. So there was a white farmer who sued the Biden administration and won. A federal judge said this is discriminatory. It violates the 14th Amendment and the Fifth Amendment, right to equal protection and due process and so forth. And violates the Civil Rights Act. It was just a mess. So the Biden administration in response said, okay, we have an injunction. We can't do this anymore. So they sent out a letter saying, if you're a farmer at all, and they didn't mention race, you can get this 120% forgiveness. But they only sent it to non-white farmers. So they were insistent upon doing this. And it just goes to show another apparent goal of these folks, which is to sort of replace white Europeans in Europe and America gradually, through replacement.
Now you're really going into anti-Semitic topics. But yeah, we'll come to that in a second. I want to just say, I've also heard, I get a lot of backlash from people. They say, oh, why don't you just call them out for who they are? I'm like, well, you can't say they're all Jewish people. That's just wrong. And then you go, oh, it's in their religion. Oh, look, can I just say something? There's some things in the Quran which are a bloody joke. There's things in the Bible that are crazy. There's things in whatever textbook you get that are like, what the heck? But can I tell you something? I've met thousands of Muslims in my time. No one thinks those things, right? They're like, oh, right, yeah, that's a bit of an extreme thing. Maybe 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, but no one thinks like that now. And it's very easy to find a crazy mullah or a crazy rabbi ranting away about, how they're going to turn the world into a caliphate or take over and subjugate everybody who's non-Jewish. But that's not really a representation of most good, decent people or who are either Muslim or Jewish. That's my personal take. Now, I might be wrong, and people might be like, well, you're freaking naive, and it's in Islam or it's in Judaism, and that's what they're all about, and they're all evil. Well, I get that all the time. I get trolled like that all the time. But I genuinely don't think so. All religions have been pretty freaking extreme in their time. Like, the witches were burnt in Salem for a reason, The women were persecuted, and most of the globe was conquered, in America and wherever in the name of, Jesus. I don't think Jesus wanted that. And then the same with Islam and whatever. So I don't think you can just say it's the religion. Although there's things in the religion that I've seen that I'm like, whoa, that's a bit weird. I don't like that. But most Jewish people that I've met are like, yeah, I don't know where that obscure crap's come from, but I've never seen that, or I don't believe that crap, right? So that's that. Now, what I would want to say is, when you say the redacted group, who are these people? Because is it genuinely a group of people who are like satanic, occult, weird people who've hijacked the religion, and they're redacted, and they have brainwashed the masses of good, decent Jews into thinking their agenda is right and to protect them, and using fear porn? Well, there was a Holocaust, and if we don't do this, you're going to die, and they're going to come and kill you. Because I've heard from Jews from Israel, like Efrat, Fenixen, that they are constantly bombarded with this propaganda, even from school. Like, oh, everybody wants to kill us, all the Arabs want to kill us. So what I'm trying to say is, if you're even a decent, normal human being, if you're just constantly bombarded with this propaganda, you're going to think like this. And the analogy back to COVID is, during COVID, the majority of people wanted to be jabbed with a genetic bioweapon. The majority of people thought it was okay to punish the unvaccinated. The majority of doctors thought it was perfectly fine to withhold medical treatment from the unvaccinated. Now, these people are good people who have been indoctrinated and brainwashed into thinking and doing wrong, bad things. So I think most Jews fall into that camp too. Most of them have just been brainwashed with the wrong information and are being used as a shield by a few to enact their evil goals and agenda. Do you think that's reasonable, my hypothesis?
Yes, I do. And when I said a goal of these people is X, I didn't mean to imply that it's all of any particular ethnic or religious group. What I often have found to be the best model for this is what is called redacted military intelligence. And by that, I mean, if you look at the writings of Christopher Bolin, the journalist who has a website, Bolin, BOLLYN.com, who studied 9/11 very heavily and who was behind it. And he went into great detail researching the planning, the execution, the setup for the buildings and so forth. It's a group within military intelligence. In other words, we don't know exactly the name of the intelligence units that are behind this. Is it Mossad, Shin Bet, Sayeret, Matkal? There's a whole bunch of groups, and we don't know the names of them all. But it's these ones who plan certain operations. And I would say that the average Christian, the average Muslim, the average Jewish person has no idea about this, would not go along with it if they did know about it. I've got, for example, I am involved in several medical startups, and I have a co-founder with me, a Jewish doctor who's amazing. And he's heard about this stuff, and he's as appalled as anyone. And I've got, there's a bunch of people who are Jewish writing on Substack who are also opposed to this. I would say Meryl Nass, Elizabeth Glass, and others. Probably Alex Berenson, talking about the vaccines being harmful. And so I think it's a group, and here's, I think, one of the hints. I don't know exactly what's going on in Gaza. You hear things on both sides, but what they show on Twitter and other social media looks appalling. And to the extent there's something illegal going on there, which the UN claims there is, and the Red Cross and others, you hear a justification from, for example, Netanyahu, as they have to destroy Amalek, which is something that comes from the Old Testament and the Talmud, and I believe. And I think the average Jewish person is not on board with that at all, because the command there is wipe out everyone who's Amalek, who's your enemy, and their seed. In other words, you have to wipe out their memory, all their offspring, forever. So the average person like you or I doesn't know about this and doesn't agree with it. But when you hear this rhetoric coming from certain leaders, you have to worry. And the other thing that really kind of shook me on this topic was, a few months ago, 60 Minutes did a report on the exploding pagers in Lebanon. And they had supposedly several members of Mossad on giving interviews with masks. And they basically described something that I think no decent person would embrace, which was they control the distribution of these weapons in a way that is untraceable and is done by people of other countries and is long in planning. What they said was we distributed these pagers 10 years before they exploded. And we had shell companies set up and no one could trace it to us. And they were quite proud. And the 60 Minutes host, Leslie Stahl, said this was daring and, almost praising it as just such a great operation. Well, the problem is it didn't only kill the target, Hezbollah, that they said. It was killing some children, some medics, which I assume means doctors and paramedics.
Bystanders.
So, yeah, exactly. And there's some videos on Twitter that have shown up a 12-year-old girl who had it explode in her face, and she lived through it. And these things are just incredibly horrible. And I'd say the average sensibility person would never go along with this or accept it.
So have you ever felt lost after receiving a diagnosis? Nervous, anxious, scared, wishing someone would explain it to you clearly and guide your next steps? I get it, folks. Trust me, I've been there many a time in my last 49 years and 11 months. But don't worry, because I'm here to help you. If you're facing surgery and want to understand your options better, the risks involved, or what questions to ask your surgeon or doctor, this service is for you. Since launching my consultation service 6 weeks ago, I've spoken with all sorts of people navigating really complex health decisions who have felt confused, unheard, or simply overwhelmed. But after the consultation, they've all come back and told me how great they have found it. Just look at the reviews, visit my website, docmalik.com, and go to consultations. One person said they felt truly heard for the first time. Another described how my conversation with them helped them understand what they really needed to heal, not just what they wanted to hear. So I bring both medical experience and honesty to the table. I help you see the bigger picture and make informed decisions about your body and your future. Whether it's understanding your condition, preparing for surgery, or finding clarity on what mainstream doctors may not be telling you, this is your chance to think clearly and move forward with confidence. It's online, it's flexible, it's totally personalized, individualized, and decentralized. So book your consultation today at docmalik.setmore.com or visit my website, docmalik.com, and go to consultations. So let's get you the clarity, the confidence, and the courage to take your next steps on your terms. Lots of love, Doc Malik. But the thing is, like, the hypocrisy knows no bounds. If an Arab country had done this to Israel, and thousands of pagers had exploded in marketplaces, schools, hospitals, clinics, killing and maiming IDF soldiers, but also their family and innocents, you would have had such an uproar. Look at these barbaric Muslims. They're cruel, they're evil, they're satanic, they're not human. They're like, look what they've done to us. Look, these innocent people have died. That would have been the story. You would have pictures and names up of Jewish victims and Israeli victims. But when it happens the other way around, when the Muslim Arabs and the Christian Arabs or the Druze or whatever die, it's just like, yeah, well, they're Arabs. Who gives a shit? They had it coming. They're not like us. We're better than them. So there's a fundamental, racial superiority business going on here, which I think a lot of people don't realize that they are, because I see it on Twitter too, the cheering on. Yeah, go, good for them, who cares? Well, they had it coming. Well, it's their fault for hanging out with these people. Like, making excuses for innocent people to die. And this isn't even warfare. It's cowardly. It's terrorism. So now you have a state undertaking real terrorism abroad, and they get lauded and congratulated. And when another country retaliates or resists an occupation, they get labeled a terrorist I mean, everything's inverted, don't you think? It's complete inversion.
Yeah, we have a congressman now in Florida named Randy Fine, who just last night, when Trump posted on Truth Social, everybody in Tehran should evacuate, Randy Fine tweeted, bombs away, and also during Gaza, he was retweeting pictures of people who had been killed and said, this is great, we need more of it. It's this kind of apparent brutality, which is hard to understand and hard to accept. And certainly it's definitely not all of any particular group. It's just certain people.
Well, listen, you've got Christian Zionists doing this, speaking like this. You've got English people, agnostic and atheist people talking like this. You've got Indians talking like this. You've got people from all over the spectrum going, yeah, give them hell. Don't go do it, whatever. It's just the othering is complete. And, the parallels are so similar. If from what I've taught in history, and I do have to question everything, apparently the Nazis did this to the Jews. They othered them and made them subhuman. And so normal Germans would be like, yep, great, good for them. They deserve it. It's their fault. They're subhuman. Well, we've now just got a complete flip of that now. And, Yeah,
as physicians, it's very hard for us to think that way. We just can't do it. Now, certainly, if there's a real enemy who's a threat to someone, then of course they need to be dealt with in war. But the question is, are some of these events that were shown in the news real justifications for going and wiping out a group of people? 9/11 is an example of something that appears to have been a false flag to justify a lot of wars that cost the U.S. trillions and tens of thousands of soldiers' lives and was not justified. I mean, even President Trump said going to Iraq was a huge mistake in 2003, and we lost so much and lost over 1 million lives there. And so,
just think about that: 1 million lives. So, I don't know, Detroit. Has Detroit got 1 million people? Austin, Texas, is that 1 million people?
I think so.
Just imagine a medium-sized city in New York just being wiped out. Can you imagine the indignation and the anger and, the retribution that would happen? And the memory of how that would be burned into every kid and adult, the movies made to commemorate and remember, and the memorials made. And then the punishment, the hellfire that would come down on any group that was responsible for that 1 million deaths. Well, folks, our countries did that to Iraq. 1 million kids, mainly children and young kids, and innocent people died because of our bombs, sanctions, and warfare on them. Just think about that. It's incredulous. It's so large a figure, you can't actually contemplate it. It's difficult to imagine.
It is. And this is the kind of thing that I don't even like to think or talk about, but it's important that since we're on these topics and very few are talking about it, that, we come out and say what we believe is right. Just like you did with the vaccine and a number of other issues during COVID. And, you had to suffer for it far more than many people, but you were standing up for the truth. I mean, I just got knocked off Twitter for like 16 months. And then I finally got back on maybe a year after Elon bought it. And then since then, it's been a big shadow banning thing where, there's no audience. You're just in an echo chamber. So that's minimal compared to, what you went through. And there's a lot of journalists who are talking about these issues with respect to what's going on in the Middle East. And, I just hope and pray that they are safe, and they're not targeted like so many people have been,
Yeah, 100%. What I don't like is also the hypocrisy. So when Palestinian children and women die in Gaza, well, it's their fault for being there. And it's Hamas's fault because they're using them as human shields. The most densely populated part of the world, the open prison that's Gaza, it's their fault, basically. And even though most of the people in Gaza were only babies when Hamas came to power and had nothing to do with voting them in. This creation of Israel, by the way, Israeli intelligence, Hamas was an Israeli intelligence thing promoted by them. So when they get into power, these kids weren't even like, they had nothing to say about it. And it's like, not like they can overthrow them. Like, could we overthrow Keir Starmer and our conservative leaders, because, the Uni Party? No, we can't. It's so hard to deal with these tyrants. We're victims. Well, most Palestinians are innocent victims. They can't help who's in power and wielding the gun and marching around. But, they were accused of, you're using human shields. Well, now it's come to light that the headquarters of IDF and Mossad are in downtown Tel Aviv, And it's like, what, are they not using the city and civilians as, human shields? Like, why does one rule apply for one group and it doesn't apply for another? And then when a rocket hits Tel Aviv, it's like, see, they're attacking, civilians. But then I just saw a video clip of an Israeli bomb hitting, deliberately targeting a broadcasting center, news center. Like, those are civilians in there. And you've got people cheering it on Twitter, like famous prominent people and politicians. And they're like, yeah, go give them hell. I think it was Gad Saad or something. Well, he said something, but that was a blast or something like that. And you're just like, where's your humanity? These are innocent people just working in a newsroom. Like, they're not military targets. Like, I thought it was meant to be military targets and nuclear facilities. But it's like, it's the double standards all the time. It's the double standards. One Israeli kid dies. It's the end of the world. 40,000 Palestinians die. Well, who cares? It's their fault. They're all terrorists in the making. Something else happened that I thought was very interesting. I just can't remember it now. But it's the hypocrisy and the double standards, which I find incredible. Okay, fine. This one as well. Israel did a preemptive attack. There was no indication that Iran was going to attack or do anything. So Israel is an aggressor. And instead of calling them out and saying, Israel is an aggressor, Trump's like, defending them. We've got Israel's back. No, you should be telling Israel this is wrong. Why did you attack Iran? We're in the middle of negotiations. If Iran had attacked Israel first, the whole world would have risen up in condemnation. So again, it's a flip of everything. Now, the next thing is, we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. Well, they've stated for the last 15 years we don't want nuclear weapons. The only place in the Middle East that's got nuclear weapons is Israel. So why are they allowed to have nuclear weapons? But Iran isn't. And it just goes on and on, the hypocrisy. Then they go, Iran is a theocratic state. Well, isn't Israel ethnically a Jewish state or religiously a Jewish state? Like, you're all the same. Like, you all want your own religion and blah, blah. I'm coming from a place where I just believe in God and that's it. And I think you should keep religion out of politics and government. But it's a double speak. It's the double standards. It's the hypocrisy. I, as a human being, just find that really uncomfortable and I don't like it,
Yeah, I know Alan Dershowitz just wrote an article yesterday saying that a preemptive strike on Iran is justified legally and morally and so forth. I didn't read the whole article yet, but he's basically saying their desire to get a nuclear weapon, despite the U.S. telling them not to and everyone telling them not to, would justify that. But like you said, all of the records, including what Tulsi Gabbard testified to not too long ago in Congress, which is that Israel has stated, and independent inspectors have stated, there's no intent to get a nuclear weapon, and there's no evidence that they are working toward one. Or now, that could be wrong, but this is the Director of National Intelligence for the U.S. telling Congress this. So, and interestingly, you may have heard recently that Trump was trying to negotiate peace with Iran. Then the attack occurred, and Trump said, the U.S. knew about this all along. I knew about it all along. I was just pretending to bring Iran to the table so we could, the implication was kind of sucker them in. But Tucker Carlson then said he knows that's not true. He knows that Trump and Witkoff and others were seriously trying to negotiate peace, and they were talking to Iran seriously, not faking them out. But then when Israel struck, Trump may have felt embarrassed, and that's why he switched to saying, I knew that was going to happen all along. But the problem is, if he's telling the truth that he knew it was going to happen all along, what he's telling Americans is, I was just lying to you all about trying to bring them to the peace negotiation table. I was always planning to go along with this attack. And that's not very comforting.
And even more dangerous is the message you're sending the world. We're not a serious partner in negotiations. When we pretend to sit down with you to make peace or negotiate, it's in bad faith because we are literally pretending. We're lying to our back teeth. You can't trust. And listen, I'm old-fashioned. I think a man is only as good as his word. You know? Like, honor is important. You know, what you say, you mean. And if you don't have that honor, you don't have that, what do you have? What do you have?
Yeah.
And when I say man, I mean like humanity, like, you know, old-fashioned man. So don't get upset, people, for saying, why are you not saying women as well? But I'm just saying, like, you know, there's a time when a man was a man and his word was his word, you know. That was the trust that you gave, and the respect you gave a man was on how valuable that word was. And someone who was a liar or a cheater, well, they had no word. They didn't have any integrity, and they were of no worth. But if someone else said, look, don't worry, I will do this, or I will pay for this person, you know, that'd be like, okay, well, that's good enough for me. I know that man's, you know, a man of his word. That's important. And what Trump has demonstrated is himself as an individual, and America as a country isn't a country of its word or a man of his word. He's a liar. He's two-faced. He's cheating. And that sends a horrible message to the world. Because when it comes to negotiations, like, what the... And the problem is, you know what it's like. Whether it's building a medical practice and reputation, or a business, or whatever. It takes a lifetime to build trust. It takes seconds to knock it down. And even if he is lying, that was a very poor judgment. He should have said the truth. He should have said, I was negotiating in good faith. The rug's been pulled underneath me. I didn't know Israel was going to attack. I feel let down. I can understand maybe why Israel would want to do this, but I think it was a wrong call. And as their friend, I think it's wrong, and I'm going to try and restrain it. We will not be supporting this action. You know, we would be there to protect them, but we can't condone this, and we won't be supporting them any further. He would have had so much respect from around the world if he said that. The truth. You know, telling the truth really does work. But by saying, oh yeah, I knew this all the time. You know, we were playing a game of sucker punch. It's a business deal. And, you know, I was lying from my back teeth while we were getting things in place. That just makes him look like a crook.
Yeah, it's surprising too, because Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said as soon as the attack happened, the U.S. didn't know anything about this. We're not part of this. So assuming he's telling the truth, then it does look like Tucker Carlson said, Trump was just trying to not be embarrassed by being caught off guard. But instead, like you mentioned, saying that, oh, I know it all along and I was just faking everyone out is worse because it shows you're not true to your word. It's funny because if you listen to Trump's old statements from years ago, including on his TV show, The Apprentice, he would often talk about the importance of one's word. So this is a compromise he's making, and we can, you know, only guess why. You know, I know he's heavily funded by certain folks, and he may feel an obligation.
Wasn't it Adelson that gave him £1 billion for his campaign? And they're ardent Zionists?
$100 million from Miriam Adelson, and I think, according to Track APAC, he got something like $230 million total from different sources in that realm.
Okay, well, listen, I want to quickly talk about something else, and then you can maybe expand on that. So I did a tweet a few days ago, and here we go. The pattern of war. I don't know if you can see this. Can you see this?
Yes.
So, you know, what I said was, here we go. I think this is important here. Every generation, there's a false flag or engineered pretext to drag America into yet another war its people never asked for. The idea that the United States as a functioning democracy is laughable. I've since realized it's not a democracy, it's a republic. It's not even a republic, it's been a corporation since the 1800s. US foreign policy is not shaped by the will of the people, it's shaped by APAC, by lobbyists, by unelected bureaucrats and deep state actors. It is not America first, it is Israel first. Time and time again, the deep state launches wars and interventions with no congressional approval, no public mandate, and no accountability. The people are irrelevant. The objectives are global control, resource extraction, and regime change, not peace, not liberty, and certainly not national interest. Let's not sugarcoat it. The United States is ruled by an evil cabal, a machine that will sacrifice its own soldiers, destroy foreign nations, and crush dissent to achieve its goals. And the tragedy? It works. Because of generational amnesia. Because of NPC level programming. Because when that false flag happens, people will scream for war again, blind to the fact that it is their own government and the agencies pulling the strings behind the curtain. And you got the Lusitania, and that's what brought America into World War One. Then you had Pearl Harbor. You can say it's false flag or not, but they really poked Japan, knew Japan was going to attack, and then played dumb and let it happen. So then they entered World War II, Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam, and then you got 9/11 and the dancing Israelis and whatnot, and the perpetual war, forever war in the Middle East and all the upheaval. But, people tell me, some of this has gone back to even the USSS Maine and the Spanish-American War. And there's so many other incidents. Now, not all of these were redacted, if I'm correct, but the modus operandi of the deep state, whoever that is, God knows, I wish I knew, is let's manufacture consent for the public. Let's get them on board with attacking. And I'll be honest with you, what I'm really scared about is a false flag. Where Americans are like, what's going on out there in the Middle East? And you know what? A bomb goes off in New York, a dirty bomb, or, 200,000 Americans are dead because some nuke that's gone off in a suitcase. And all fingers point at Iran because of the Iranian passport they find in the ashes, intact, saying Ayatollah or whatever. And they go, oh, it's Iran, let's go to war with Iran. But it might be a cyber attack. It might be it might be the Nimitz that's meant to be decommissioned. They let the Nimitz get sunk. They maybe even sink it themselves. And then they go, right, let's get into this war. I think that's what worries me. That guy Netanyahu and the people he's working for are desperate to drag America into this war. What do you think?
I'm worried about false flags too. And that's a great tweet you put up. And yes, I think redacted military intelligence was involved in virtually all those, except the World War I one, when it wasn't called that because we didn't have the same country arrangement. But I just recently heard a discussion of Vietnam and what was going on behind that. There were forces, sort of early neocon forces that opposed the Soviet Union. And so fighting in Vietnam was to further their goals in trying to destabilize Soviet Union and Russia in particular. And so there were, so this was a war that dragged on for 10 years unnecessarily. And President Johnson and Nixon, to some extent, were kind of just trickling soldiers in, not trying to reach a definitive conclusion. And in that case, Johnson's on record as saying, I'm helping my friends in the military industry. In other words, the weapons manufacturers. So there's often in these wars a combination of a financial motivation and, at least lately, redacted military intelligence's goals being furthered. I think most Americans and most folks in Europe don't want war. We'd rather have peace, and we'd rather trade with all nations. There's no reason we can't be trading with all these nations that we've been trying to demonize. But I'll tell you that with regard to 9/11, what really opened my eyes was not only Christopher Bolin, but also there's a nuclear physicist named Heinz Pommer, Pommer, and he's got a website called 911history.de and another one called 911media.de. He's a very careful scientist, and he, over the years, has been trying to figure out how the towers disintegrated. We've been told first it was jet fuel fires causing a collapse, and then Judy Wood pointed out that, probably more than 95% of the mass of the buildings was gone. So you had actual disintegration, a molecular dissociation, and you were left with just a very small amount of rubble on the ground. And so she posits directed energy weapons, but more specifically, Palmer has fairly well established, by at least provided the evidence for, nuclear reactors under the buildings. And I know that sounds funny to a lot of people because they want to think that it's conventional demolition charges placed in the buildings. But you would have seen a much bigger explosion with a lot more rubble. If you look at conventional explosives, it causes a building to collapse and you're left with this rubble pile. But what Heinz Palmer has shown is through the signature of radioisotopes that were present around ground zero, especially strontium and barium in equal concentrations, that's a signature of a nuclear fission event. And he says, and then people will try to debunk that by saying, well, there was no nuclear blast because we know from the seismic activity and the auditory activity, the acoustic, that we didn't have a blast. But it's not really a blast. It's like a deflagration or a meltdown that causes superheating of probably a water booster that then caused neutron emissions that could disintegrate the building. And so Palmer lays this all out. He's had a PDF that describes this that he's been updating as more evidence comes in through the years. And I think that's the very best explanation. And once you understand some of these things about the mechanisms of how this was done and who the players were, you get a clear picture of, a structure that's operating behind the scenes. And again, this is not anti-Semitic or anti-anything. It's, again, you and I love Jewish people. We love Muslims. We love Christians. This is a group of military folks who are doing these things.
Are they all military folks? RFK was assassinated. It looks like it was a combination of the mafia, CIA, and Mossad. Who they're not all military. There's the intelligence agencies, but these intelligence agencies can't just be working for themselves. They must have a master. And there's a lot of people, like take COVID. If you look at the people who were running a lot of the COVID operation, they were from a certain group. And if you look at the media, that's civilians, it's run by a certain redacted group. And, they promote a lot of propaganda through Hollywood. If you look at all the Arabs from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, they're all portrayed as Neanderthals, subhuman, lacking culture, music, art, misogynistic, heavy accent, and just idiots. And then it's just a lot easier to justify bombing people like that. So when a war is done in the Middle East, people just go, "Oh yeah, it's just another towhead. Who cares about them? They're not like us." And I've had people say that to me. I remember people saying to me, "Are you a Muslim?" I was like, "Yeah, this is like my 20s." They're like, "Oh, you're not like those other people. You're pretty cool." Like I was like, "Oh, okay. What does that mean?" Do you see what I mean? Like they had this caricature in their head that's been created by Hollywood that what people are like. And anyone who's been to the Middle East or, North Africa or whatever, and just met people from that area, they're really friendly and hospitable. They like playing with their kids at the park and throwing a ball and having a nice meal on a Saturday and Sunday. And the guys all want to have sex with their wives and their wives don't. It's no different from anywhere else in the world. It's just kind of like, it's the same. But, the media has done a great job of painting that Islamic world as really backward. Now, I'm not saying I'm a fan of Islam. There's a reason why I left it about 15, 18 years ago. I just don't like any organized religion, frankly. I just want to be directly in correspondence with my creator. I don't need an intermediary. I think all religions have been captured by man. But there's a large propaganda machinery, and there's a lot of people in lots of positions in media, in Hollywood, in the newspapers, in Big Pharma who are from this redacted group. Now, what is that all about? And they don't call out what's going on. They all sing from the same hymn sheet. They all look after each other. And if you say the wrong thing, well, you won't get invited to the gigs. You're not in the club anymore. But if you stay on track, then you'll do well in life. But someone like me and you, we are not going to get anywhere. So what's that all about? Because they're not all military people.
Right. So I think the structure of this seems to be that military intelligence. There's an interview with a woman who was married to an Army intelligence guy. It's a 7-hour interview. Her name escapes me, but it's kind of famous. It's on BitChute, and she talks about the things she learned from her husband. He became an alcoholic and died, but he was very high up in the group. And she basically said that when you hear about the CIA, most of the CIA is Army intelligence. And in fact, they're the ones calling the shots. And the question is, who's calling the shots on U.S. Army intelligence? And it turns out it's redacted. They're the ones who are driving U.S. war policy. And you notice that what they do for the mass of Christians here in America is they frame it as, we need to advance these war goals to bring about the end times and the return of Jesus. So that involves certain wars in the Middle East, which Russia and China are likely to join, and the defeat of Edom or Rome, which is us, Europe and the US. And a lot of the Christians who are going along with this are just thinking, I want Jesus to come back, so I think I'm going to go along with this. This sounds great. But
it's so ridiculous, isn't it?
It's
so bizarre.
And it's going to be, yeah, exactly. So what I think is going on with respect to your question about who else who's not in the military is involved and how, there are civilian helpers. How do I say this? If you look at redacted military intelligence, they rely on a large network of civilian helpers. And if you look at, for example, 9/11, you had Michael Chertoff, who was director of national intelligence, and they became the second director of Homeland Security. And he's the one who kind of framed the whole narrative. And you also had Philip Zelikow, who was the chair of the 9/11 Commission report. And there were people on the 9/11 Commission, like Georgia Senator Max Cleland, who said, it wasn't even a real committee. We were just handed a script by Philip Zelikow saying, this is what happened. It was Osama bin Laden running everything from a cave, crashing planes into buildings, which is also impossible. At least what we were shown on TV is impossible, according to aeronautical engineers and pilots. But this is the narrative that we were fed, said Max Cleland. And so there's these folks that they're not directly in the military, but they are coordinating with them. And this, we saw this even during COVID vaccine rollout. There were, I don't know if you saw, Project Veritas did some kind of reporting on how the vaccines were manufactured in an atypical way, where windows on the cleaning rooms were blacked out. So the QC people, quality control people, could not look in the windows and see what was going on. And just very, very strange things. And then there were executives at Pfizer and Moderna who were telling their employees how to talk to the media. And one of the Project Veritas reporters confronted one of the executives at Pfizer, and she just ran away. And I mean, in one sense, it's understandable because you don't want to talk to the media unless you're authorized to. On the other hand, there's a lot of suspicious things that some of these whistleblowers, like Melissa Strickland, documented in the production of these vaccines. In other words, you also had people talking about Moderna vaccines having other things added to it that were not listed on the ingredients. Now, I can't confirm this. This was something that appeared originally on 4chan and circulated through the media. But the people who wrote this about what kind of things were put in to the vaccines off-label seemed to at least be knowledgeable about pharmaceuticals and genetics, because they were describing different gene sequences that were being placed in that case, RNA. So again, I can't confirm this, but a lot of suspicious things. And you're right, they're not all directly military officers, but they could be civilians who are supportive of the goal.
Okay, so before you tell me what the goal is, how did these people get so much power? Like these redacted people are in civilian positions and all that. Why in so much power. Like, and are there some who just genuinely think they're on, the good side and they've just been brainwashed? Who's coordinating all this? Who's organizing? Like, where's the nexus, the hub, the brain? Because I keep hearing different things from different people. Some people say it's the royal family. It's all the royal family. Some people say it's the City of London. It's the city. Some people say it's the Vatican. Some people say it's 13 black nobility families. Some people say it's the Committee of 300. I need to get that book. I need to read it. Some people say it's satanic occultists. Some people say it's not even human beings. It's extra dimensional. I think Catherine Austin Fitz was saying that. I'm like, what the frack is going on here? Like, what the frack? And are the redacted the brainchild of all this, or are they just a tool on this occasion being used to enact the evil goals of the real bad people at the top? What the frack is going on, James?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I don't accept any of the theories that don't have sufficient evidence. They could be true, but until we see sufficient evidence, it's very hard to just jump on board. Like you mentioned, Catherine Austin Fitz and the interdimensional demons that she says are behind these things. I mean, there's just no evidence of that. If anybody produces evidence of this or aliens or whatever, then we can consider it. But right now, I think we have to go with the human options. I just saw a YouTube channel where they talk about everything being the British Empire behind everything. And they say what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Israel is all run by the British Empire. And this is a channel where the people who, it's a couple of women who used to work with Lyndon LaRouche, in one case since the 1970s, where he had, I don't know if you know about him, but he had a publication called Executive Intelligence Review. And he basically said the bad guys are the British Empire. So they were upset, the story goes, that the U.S. broke away and got independence, and they've been trying to seek to pull the U.S. back under their wing. And it would be strange. I mean, if there's evidence of it, great, let's look at it. But as far as the folks that are in control, well, you have this dynamic where for example, I look at Alan Dershowitz, who I respect as a lawyer, Harvard law professor, and he is defending Israel on really all of its actions. And it's understandable. And by the way, again, I love Israeli people. I love Jewish people. So this is not a criticism of them. But what happens is I think that he just feels in his position as a powerful professor and lawyer and author, well-known, he needs to be a voice for that side. I don't think he's participating in some of these things. In fact, I'm sure he doesn't even know about some of these issues. For example, he was in a debate with RFK Jr. a couple of years ago on vaccines, and Dershowitz thought going into the debate that all vaccines have been approved by the FDA are great, and they're fantastic, and they should be mandated. And he even said that this case from 1906, I think it is, Jacobson versus Massachusetts, by the Supreme Court, stood for the proposition that you can have a vaccine forced on you, forcibly injected. That's not what the case said. It said rather that you have a choice and you can have repercussions, like you could be put in jail or you could be fined for not going along with a vaccine mandate. But the government did not have a right to physically force an injection into you. So I think he's not privy to all of the things that are going on with the injection campaign, for example, or with what may be going on with migration. I don't hear him talk about that much at all. But he just feels he's a representative for this side and maybe to defend them at all costs. I hope that's not true. He used to be a very strong free speech advocate. But I haven't heard him talk about some of these anti-Semitism laws, which are a direct violation of the First Amendment. And again, I'm not defending anti-Semitism. I don't like anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim talk or anything. But we have a right to express our views in the United States, and we can't outlaw it the way they're doing in the UK.
You've got the right to offend someone.
That's correct. In fact, that's what the First Amendment's all about. It's not just to defend speech we all like. It's to defend that which would otherwise be quite offensive. And there's a bunch of Supreme Court cases that say exactly that. So I'm sort of surprised that Dershowitz, who everybody listens to, and he taught constitutional law at Harvard for over 50 years, isn't coming out and saying these laws are unconstitutional. And I think it's because he's wanting to stand on the defense side. So I think a lot of people are going along with things, as you mentioned, not because they're explicitly in on the full plan, but they just think this is the side, this is the team we're on. And then the people, one thing you saw in the social media where people were objecting to the vaccine mandates and they were objecting to some of the ingredients in the vaccine, like RFK Jr. and Robert Malone and Malhotra and Makari, they all say, okay, there's problems with these vaccines. They seem to be killing people. In fact, RFK Jr. said this is the deadliest vaccine in history. This is like 3 years ago. But they'll always get you to think that it's just an accident. People tried, they failed, the vaccines failed, and we'll try again next time a little better. And same thing with Bhattacharya, our NIH director. It's always, everybody's trying, even Dr. McCullough, who I respect greatly. He said in 2021, this is a bioweapon operation. He said, we're going into phase 2 of bioterrorism. He said, they want to get a needle in every arm. It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason for herd immunity that you need to get a needle in every arm, but they were demanding that. And Dr. Eden even said, if the goal were just money, they could vaccinate half the population at twice the cost per shot, twice the price per shot, and make the same amount of money. So it was not merely money, and it looked like bioterrorism. I think Dr. McCullough was right in 2021. And then he got hooked up with John Leake and wrote that book about the biopharmaceutical complex. And I don't know if that's causal, but soon thereafter, he's changed his statements to say it's not intentional. It's just an overzealous vaccine frenzy. And it was a bad choice to use the spike protein and to use the messenger RNA platform in some of the shots. But, it was not intentional. That's his exact words. It was not intentional. Or he said, I don't think it's by design. I, unfortunately, looking at the evidence, think that there's a lot of things they were doing by design. Now, they're not killing everyone. That would be too obvious. It'd be, a clear crime. But they can kill enough people in vulnerable groups where folks are noticing it, but the general population seems not to notice. They just seem to say, oh, I lost 5 older relatives in nursing homes. But that's just how it is. They were older. But in addition, the mandates accomplished a lot in terms of training us to submit to irrational orders. The masks, which have lots of studies showing don't reduce transmission of aerosolized viruses like influenza and SARS-CoV-2, and they don't block aerosols and they don't decrease infection rates. But yet they were mandated. I mean, you couldn't go anywhere here, into a store or wherever, without the masks, and the police would even tackle you over it. It was irrational, but they're training us to go along with this so that in the future, maybe they could gauge how many people in the population were going along with it. And of course, everyone had to some extent, or they could be forbidden from going to buy food or get medical care. But they're also watching probably who's objecting. But I think it's more important to object to something we see as scientifically and morally incorrect than to just stand by and submit. So I think this operation had a lot of purposes. I think it's increasing disability. It's increasing deaths. It's discouraging a lot of people. It increased suicides. It trained people. It got them to be able to see who's objecting and who's going along and so forth. And I think you could, like you said, you could see, based on the doctors who went along with this, who is either gullible or naively just blindly following, which is uncharacteristic of a doctor. You're supposed to look for data. You're supposed to look at the justification for these orders, like you do for your patient. You don't just blindly prescribe something. Just
No.
find out what the benefits and risks are. And some of the doctors might have been part of the operation. I suspect some were. Some of the ones who attacked us on Twitter very early on for pointing out what the peer-reviewed literature said about the spike protein. All these doctors come out, supposedly doctors, attacking. And there was even some doctor who was reporting everyone to the board who objected to, had any questions about the vaccine. You had to just keep your mouth shut or you're going to get reported to the board. And so, yeah, it was incredible.
It was incredible. I agree with you about the shots. I'll read it. So I got contacted by 2 London foot and ankle surgeons who happened to be Jewish. One of whom I've never really had any dealings with. One of whom I thought was like a friend, colleague. He actually wanted to go into business with me. And I said, oh, dude, I just want to stay independent, please. And on the 5th of November, 2023, he said, Ahmed, 18th of November, 2023, he posts a picture of Ava Bartlett Wikipedia page on my WhatsApp. Hi, just checking, this was your podcast guest recently. Now, it's funny he would ask me that because, of course, he knows that. Yeah, it's there, it's on my website. And I said, we both know she was. Have you listened to it? Then there's a message that he's deleted, which I didn't get a chance to read. And then he said, just the IG post. And I said, well, please listen to the whole podcast. It's always good to get your facts. I'd love to have you on my podcast as well. Blah, blah, blah. Never, ever contacted me ever again. And on Instagram, I got another message by a guy, a London foot and ankle surgeon, happens to be Jewish. And he said something quite derogatory and rude. It said, you're pathetic getting Ava Bartlett on your show. How dare you? And you should be ashamed of yourself. And I wrote back saying, oh, never ever had any correspondence from you before. Interesting that in the last 3 years, when we had COVID and a lack of informed consent and bodily autonomy, you never said a pip. Where were you then? Shame on you for not speaking up for medical ethics. Anyway, so I had these two engagements. The next day, the private hospital suspended me.
Unbelievable.
One of these guys works in that hospital. Now, I'm not saying that they reported me because I was told it was anonymous, but the only people that mentioned anything to me about this podcast were those 2. And apparently there's no patient involved. And I suspect one of them or both of them mentioned to the hospital management, and the hospital management immediately suspended me. They didn't ask for a meeting. They didn't ask for a clarification. They didn't ask for, my side of the story. They just said, we're suspending you with immediate effect and you're not allowed in the hospital premises. And then they undertook a 5-month investigation. And I got a copy of the report which said, I'm not guilty. And then immediately I got an email saying, oh, that report was sent to you by accident. Please delete it. And I was like, well, I'm afraid I've got it now. So tough. And what I'm trying to say is those 2 guys, if they did report it, I don't think they're bad people. I don't think they're working for military intelligence. I just think they're Jewish people who've been brainwashed into thinking that, you need to stand by your tribe no matter what. And I'm a bad person and I'm attacking you and I'm dangerous. So you know what? You need to take me out. But I would say to a lot of just normal Jewish people, don't think of your tribe as being the Jewish tribe. And I would say this to Muslims as well. There's a problem that I have with organized religion, that you think only of your tribe being the group that you're with. And in some cases, it's not even you're a Muslim or a Christian or whatever. It's a very small sect, Methodist or Mormon or, Shia. It's not even the broad religion. It's like, it's your tiny little group that's right and everyone else is wrong. You shouldn't think like that. I would say to all my Jewish friends, your loyalty should be to Team Humanity. You should, that's the truth. Like, and if you see something wrong, you should apply that rule to, is there something wrong being done to humanity? And there shouldn't be one rule to your tribe and another rule to people outside of your so-called tribe, because there's only one tribe. It's the human tribe. I think that's what I would say. Same to doctors, you know. You're seeing something wrong, speak up. If you're seeing other doctors do something wrong, speak up. Don't just pile on the doctors who are speaking out and questioning. So I was a bit disappointed and sad by those engagements that I had with my Jewish colleagues. But I I don't think they're evil. I think they're brainwashed and very mistaken. You think that's reasonable?
I do. It's sad to hear. And I don't know who Ava Bartlett is, but I assume that they had some objection to her.
She said on my podcast that there's some officials in the Israeli government who are openly demanding ethnic cleansing of Gaza. And that is actually factually correct. And you can find it on the internet.
Yeah, I've heard that.
But
I've heard that.
the hospital didn't care. It was an immediate, yep, you're suspended. Don't come back into the hospital.
And there's no due process, which is
Nope.
outrageous.
Because it's practicing privileges. So I don't have a contract, official employment contract. I'm self-employed. They have given me the privilege.
Sure.
And it's up to them whether they want me to work there or not. And if they're not happy, they can just tell me to shove off, which they did.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. You're right. If they had noticed that there was some jeopardizing of patient care, then they could do an immediate suspension legally. But I know there have been some lawsuits where doctors have sued for being abruptly cut off from their privileges without due process, and they've won. But you don't want to sue your own hospital. You know, that's the problem. It's not, and it's also expensive and not worth it.
And the laws are very different in the UK. In America, you've got the right to freedom of speech. There's no such law here in the UK, and you very quickly get mired in lawfare. And then they bog you down. Oh, is this the right jurisdiction? Should it be the tribunal, the employment tribunal? No, you're not an employee, so it's not an employment tribunal issue. But before we go on to the next court, we still have to go through the employment tribunal, and that might take 18 months to 2 years. And once that's exhausted and they've confirmed that it's not the employment tribunal's job to adjudicate on this, then we go to the next court. You know, so it gets drawn out, dragged out. Write emails, write reports, respond to everything, collect information, collect data, pay your lawyer, and the bill's going up and up and up. Most likely going to lose the case, then go to the next lawyer, and then you're going to lose that. And then, 5 years later, you've lost your house, your marriage is in tatters, and you're fucked. And what have you achieved? And if you even do win, they go, okay, well, fine, yeah, you're allowed to go back, and we'll compensate you. Here's £50,000 and blah, blah, blah. And was it worth it? Was it worth it?
Right. And then there's ill will when you go back. So it's really
like, do I even want to be there? Like, do I even want to be there? And then what I also realized is that they're just looking for the next pretext. It's like the next, and then so you're always looking at over your shoulder. You're just because everybody makes mistakes. It's just natural. But like with you, the magnifying glass is on you, and they're just waiting for a complaint to come or you to trip up or do something. So you're walking on eggshells the whole time. And can you imagine the stress then? I mean, it's stressful enough being a surgeon, And then on top of that, the other stress, when is someone going to take offense to my next social media post? I had a conversation with James Hill. He's a raving loony anti-Semitic. We're definitely suspending you now, Doc Malik.
I hope they don't say that.
I know, but you know what I'm saying. You You can't be living your life like this.
I know.
I wrote a Substack saying the process is the punishment. It is the punishment.
It's true.
So
it's true.
I just didn't want to take part in that anymore. So anyway, listen, let's go back. So what I'm trying to say, so I think a lot of good Jewish people are just brainwashed and are going along with the propaganda that's been fed to everybody, including the Christian Zionists and even people who aren't Christian. They just think, the propaganda said that Israel is this beacon of democracy. It's an amazing place. It's surrounded by Neanderthals and savages. And, it's like this virgin girl surrounded by a horde of rapists. We need to protect it. And there's a biblical connotation. It's a biblical Israel, which it isn't actually. And, if you're a good Christian, well, you need to support the Jews. And there's a lot of right-wing commentators that I see everywhere, and they talk about Judeo-Christian values. We need to protect, uphold Judeo. And it's like, really? Like, Muslims have got a lot of things in common with Christians. Like, they believe in Jesus, they believe in the virgin birth, they believe in Mary, and Jesus went up to heaven, and they believe that he's going to come back as a Messiah. Like, there's a lot of things that, Muslims actually believe in the same thing as Christians, and that's the Jews who've rejected all of that. So, like, what are you saying? And a lot of the values that you see in Europe today, the scientific era, the algebra, the numerics, it all came from the Arab world. The, resurgence of science and knowledge, like, it's very binary to just say, we're the best and they're just backward. I find it a lot of steeped in superiority complex and arrogance. The reality is there's beautiful things in all cultures, and there's a lot of bad things in all cultures. And, we should respect and enjoy the differences in all of these societies. But there's a caricature, I think, created by Redacted, so it makes it more palatable and easier to justify bombing and taking over other countries, etc., etc. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, and I agree with pretty much everything you said. I'm not one of these people who doesn't like Israel. I mean, I have so many Israeli friends, and they're wonderful people, and many colleagues, just like I'm sure you did. And you had those two that you mentioned. And they're just terrific people, and patients and clients. And so it's very difficult to talk about without people saying, oh, you don't like all of one group? No, of course not. It's just this idea that I just don't like as an American for our rights to be taken away. And that's what we see this particular group connected to the military, at least indirectly, doing quite frequently, trying to take away guns. For example, a lot of the school shootings that we've had over the course of the last 20 years, and just mass shootings in general, like the one in Las Vegas, appear to be false flags, engineered to try to get people to accept giving up their Second Amendment rights. And they always want to take guns away from law-abiding citizens, not criminals. There's almost never any legislation introduced to take guns away from criminals. Now, there already are some statutes that say if you've committed a gun crime, your gun will be confiscated and so forth. But whenever there's any kind of mass shooting, it's always, they immediately jump into this narrative of, we got to take the guns away. In fact, it's pretty transparent. I did a couple of articles on this maybe a year ago where they have these crisis actors that'll come out, like there'll be a grieving mother 5 minutes after the event saying, I lost my son. Why don't we take the guns away? They go instantly into an anti-gun message. And believe me, I don't want gun crime, of course, but we have a Second Amendment right for a reason. And originally, the amendment was drafted to protect people from government overreach. And same thing with First Amendment. It doesn't allow free speech necessarily on a private platform. That's one of the big issues, problems with social media. They can censor you and shadow ban you as much as they want, unless a court finds that they're a quasi-public utility, in which case then they have restrictions on how they can censor you. So far, no court has ruled that, but I think they should. For, let's say, Facebook or X, they should say, you guys are so big that you're a quasi-public forum, and people like political candidates need a right to reach out on your platform. And that would restrict their censorship ability. But right now, they're free to censor as much as they want. And they're pressured to do so by these groups that you mentioned. So the reason I write about redacted military intelligence is I just don't like seeing our rights taken away. I don't like seeing bioweapons deployed against the world. And people will say, oh, it's not a bioweapon. You were talking about the influence on doctors. Do you know, I was shocked when the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology recommended the COVID vaccines for pregnant women when there were no data to support it. And later it came out about a year ago that ACOG was paid $40 million by the Biden administration, apparently, through some group. It might have been USAID, I'm not sure, to promote this. And so that's a betrayal, I would think, with no data to support it. How would you do that? And the thing is, you know how influential the medical societies and the boards are. So influential. I get emails all the time from my medical board saying, here's a new thing that's going into effect, a new vaccine policy. And in fact, during COVID, every time there was a new authorization for children, I get an email saying, starting on Monday, you can give 5 to 12-year-olds COVID vaccines and boosters. They're announcing it. And the implication is this has been vetted. It must be good, must be okay. And so people tend to go along with it. And as you know, one of the big problems is doctors get so busy, they don't have time to read all the data. So they trust their board and their medical society. So if you're a busy OBGYN and you get an email from ACOG saying, vaccines are safe and effective for pregnant women, go ahead and prescribe them, you're going to do it very often, unless you have time to reflect and look at the data, say, where are the data on this? Oh, there are none? Okay, I think I'll pass. So it was very unbelievable.
Hi, me again. You're listening to the Doc Malik podcast. This show is 100% independent and fully funded by listeners like yourself. So if you wish to support Ahmed in all that he is doing, then please subscribe to his channel on Spotify or on his Substack, or simply buy him a coffee with one of the donation links which can be found at docmalik.com. Now, let's get back to the show.
I agree, but this is the complete inversion, The regulatory bodies, the medical colleges, the universities, they could practice unethically. They could take the money. They were, neck deep in conflicts of interest, financial, and other. And everything was fine. They didn't get into trouble. And the few dissident doctors who dared to speak out, well, it was very simple. You got suspended, you got investigated, you got dragged through the courts, you lost your livelihood, you lost your job, you're discredited and disgraced, and you're tossed on the side. And for doing the right thing, for being ethical. I've interviewed so many doctors around the world who've been through the same rinse-repeat process. Doesn't matter whether you're in Zimbabwe like Jackie Stone or Billy Bays in Australia or Mai Lee Trin, or whether you're Jerry Waters and Anne McCloskey in Ireland, or whether you're Sarah Myhill and Jane Donahan and Sam White here in the UK, or me, or all the doctors in America, or Sukrit Bhakti in Germany, or Thomas Binder, in Switzerland. It just goes on and on. It's an absolute shit show. But listen, let's go back. I still want to figure out this redacted thing. They injected all of Israel. They made it into a lab. Why would they do that?
So there's a few theories on that. One is that, there's not always the same ingredients across batches. We know that from some research done by Craig Parda-Cooper and Team Enigma, of which Sasha Latapova was a part, where they looked at different batches and they had different frequencies of adverse events, different death rates. I know that's been criticized for some reasons, but the other interesting thing that I've heard very few people talk about is in the U.S., there's a law that went into full effect in 2023 that says that all medical products, including prescription drugs, have to have a serial number on each dose or vial or carton, not just a batch number. A batch could have like 1 million doses, but in a vial or a carton, you're supposed to have an individualized barcode. That's U.S. law. And the reason is, of course, they want to be able to authenticate it. They want to be able to trace adverse events, although that's a lesser stated goal. The main thing is just to make sure it's not counterfeited. And the contracts between Pfizer and the U.S. and Pfizer and the EU and the EU contract was leaked. It was redacted officially. And somebody in Italy got hold of the original and put it up on the internet. Says the vaccine shall not be serialized. So they are forbidden from putting an individualized serial number on each vial or carton of vaccines, even though there's a batch number or a lot number, which corresponds to, maybe 30 pallets of vaccine. But why would you do that? There's no real good reason. They didn't want it to be traceable. And then there's a paper that I posted on Substack a while ago with 26 different groups around the world who've gotten hold of vials and looked at them, analyzed them with mass spectrometry and other techniques, and found differing ingredients. They didn't all have the same thing. And then Mike Adams in the US tested some vials and found no phosphorus, for example. He did an elemental analysis. And no phosphorus implies there's no RNA in there, in the messenger RNA or the DNA vaccines. So no DNA in the AstraZeneca vials he tested. That would also correspond to Johnson & Johnson or Janssen. And then no messenger RNA in the Pfizer Moderna, according to Mike Adams. So there's a lot of anomalies in looking at what's in the vials. The other issue people have talked about is the messenger RNA fragment that encodes the spike protein gets broken up. And sometimes that means it's non-functional. Other times it means there are spike protein fragments that are synthesized. And those fragments have sort of unpredictable effects, or not the intended effect necessarily of antigenicity that was intended. Now, these are all other people's research. I have not done any original research on this. I'm just quoting what other people are saying. So getting to other countries like Israel, it's possible that they got something different than what the UK got or what America got. And on the other hand, some people have said, well, maybe there's certain people who are in charge of this, to the extent it is a program to harm people, harm some people, let's say 3% or 2% of the vaccinees have an adverse event. Maybe they don't care about the people in particular countries. Maybe they don't care about sacrificing some in Israel or America or Europe. And that's a possibility too. So when people say it can't have anything to do with redacted because of what's going on in a particular country, I don't think that's necessarily the case. You could say, that's what people are saying now about this war. I just read 2 days ago that they were blocking all the flights out of Tel Aviv when the bombs started dropping. A lot of people wanted to flee, and they said nobody can leave. So, and then people on the internet were saying, "Oh, are they trying to sacrifice people?"
Yeah, I saw that from Efrat. Efrat said that they're refusing people to leave Israel, and I thought that was really weird. If your people want to leave the country, why would you stop them? Why would you stop people from leaving?
And they were stopping.
Doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, I heard they were also stopping them in Tehran. Now that could also be because the airports are not safe or whatever. It could be other reasons, but it does look very strange. And so I heard people were fleeing by boat or by land. But yeah, so it's hard to know what is going on. But yeah, you do see the argument that, well, a lot of people are having adverse events in this country or that country, therefore it can't be those people. There could be people from all these countries who are in on this.
Well, I think your common little Israeli has got more in common with me than the people at the top. I think we're just pawns and ants that these people at the top redacted use. What I still don't understand is how are these people, who funds them, who supports them, how does it work, how does the network work? The people, CEOs and owners of Hollywood and all the 6 news companies in America and deep in the American Congress, AIPAC, politicians, cabinet, journalism. How are they backed? What's that all about?
There's a lot of money, according to Catherine Austin Fitts, that's been stolen from America through the DoD and through Housing and Urban Development according to her, trillions has disappeared over the last 20, 30 years. Because she used to be like an assistant secretary of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And she tracked the money and said there's just trillions missing. And I've also heard that in the military, like during the Iraq War and Afghanistan War, there are like unlimited pools of cash that they could give to the warlords in Afghanistan, or they could give to certain people in Iraq and elsewhere. So it seems like the capital is there for whoever they want it to be for. And also you heard Janet Yellen, when she was Secretary of the Treasury during Biden's administration, saying, we will give unlimited amounts of money to Ukraine, whatever's necessary, until the job is done. So this is the Treasury Secretary basically saying, whatever you want. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it seems like the money is there for particular groups when they want to funnel it there. I don't have much more insight as to where it comes from, but it seems like there are people with a lot of cash who can move it about.
Yeah. So how do we wrest America and Europe and Britain away from this group of people, whoever they might be? Still no answers. We don't know. How do we get real sovereignty back and power? Like, everybody seems to be compromised. All the politicians, they're all captured and compromised. How do we turn things around?
So one thing I just read yesterday was that during Brexit, there was a 75% vote for the UK to leave the EU, and the politicians were afraid of trying to rig the votes, which apparently happens in many elections, probably including the US as well, because they were afraid of backlash from the people. And you don't often have that kind of fear in the politicians of the people understanding what's going on. And so I think the first thing is awareness of the nature of some of these events, that they are either false flags or they're bioweapon operations, and that the government will unleash it sometimes unknowingly. I think a lot of politicians just don't know. I think a lot of the politicians who are demanding that people get the vaccine during COVID, including Marco Rubio when he was a U.S. Senator, people were writing to him, now he's Secretary of State, people were writing to him and asking for help with vaccine injuries and so forth. And he was responding, just take the vaccine, supposedly, according to these people on Twitter. And I think they're paid to say this. And I think if enough people are aware that these things are going on, they can say, we're not going to accept this from our politicians. I hope that's enough to dissuade the politicians from going along with it, but it's very hard to see how it will. Because, for example, in Congress, we only have one person voting against a lot of these things, like, for example, the big
Thomas Massey.
Thomas Massey, yeah. And Marjorie Taylor Greene, who also didn't accept any money from a particular lobby like Massey didn't, is objecting to the war. She's saying we shouldn't be getting into this war. And those are the only two objecting to the war. Unfortunately, Massey was the only one who did not vote to accept this anti-Semitism law and this anti-Semitism definition adopted by Congress, which again appears to infringe on the First Amendment. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene went along with that. So it's disappointing. You got 535 total members of Congress, 435 representatives and 100 senators, and only one is going to stand up for free speech, and only two are objecting to the war. Obviously, if our national interests are threatened, then we can participate in a war. But if it's only because people are being paid off to support something, that's an issue.
Well, this is what I mean. I feel like America is captured. You read about people mention all the time the fifth column. Like, there's people within the American system, government, who are not acting in the best interest of the American people in the country.
Absolutely. That's what we're seeing.
They are treasonous, and they're wielding the power. What I'm trying to say is, like, how does America come back from this? I don't think Trump is who people think he is. I think he, first time round, did the whole Operation Warp Speed and enabled the vaccine rollout. He was still proud of it. He still boasts about it. And now he's in with his tech bros. I don't see anything really changing. He had a perfect opportunity to tell Netanyahu off and say, look, not in our name, this is wrong. Get in line. But it seems like America is the tail. And Israel's the dog. And America is just doing the bidding of Israel. And even if it means dragging America into a war that will be costly, that will raise petrol prices, because you're going to have the Strait of Hormuz blockaded. You're going to have turmoil, chaos. You've seen what the forever wars have done in terms of migrant invasion everywhere, destabilizing these perfectly functioning ancient civilizations like Syria. Now we backed Jelani, this al-Nusra front, psychopath, fundamentalist, head chopper. We're now congratulating him and treating him like an equal partner in Syria. We've in Libya the same. Like we've gone, and the West has gone in and totally wrecked huge swathes of the planet, destabilized countries, caused untold horror and misery for the local inhabitants. Then NGOs and the UN and the EU have worked very hard to traffic these same displaced, miserable people to the West. And that's part of, the Kalergi plan. And people talk about this replacement theory, and apparently that's anti-Semitic. If you mention that, you could go to jail in the UK. So I guess I have to be careful. Yeah. Wow. So, but it's true. Like, there's a huge demographic shift, huge transplant of people. This is not organic. This is a massive logistical effort. It's very expensive.
Huge.
And it's being designed and engineered, and it's being executed by a group of people. The UN, the EU, the Soros foundations, and more. Now we're going to do the same to Iran. And, I'm no fan of the mullahs. But, most Iranians have got nothing to do with the mullahs, and they just live their life. Just like most people have got nothing to do with Trump or Biden. They just live their life. But now America is being brought into this war, and who knows how it will cascade and the domino effects. Like, every intervention America's touched, and there's been a lot, has been an epic disaster. Unless the plan has always been destabilization, because there's I've forgotten his name, Burkett, or I can't remember. But in the early 1990s or 2000s, there was an American Pentagon official who did a policy about the core countries and the non-core countries. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, you mean like from the Project for a New American Century?
That's it.
Yeah.
Have you heard about it? So it's all about destabilizing the non-core countries around the world, and then you could rape them of their resources, and they would always be destabilized. And then the core countries are like the West, the Five Eye countries, China, Russia. But it was a plan. It was a real plan, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the same plan that you're mentioning, but there was this Project for a New American Century that Philip Zelikow was a part of, and Douglas Feith and Wormser and those guys. Yeah, so I have a couple of articles where they go into detail about what the plan is for this. And part of that also included Philip Zelikow's statement that what we need is a catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. And this was right before 9/11. And that gave him the catalyzing event that they supposedly needed to initiate this.
By the way, can I quickly just show you the picture? I found it. I'm really sorry. I need to show you.
Oh,
it's
yes.
integrated gap countries and non-integrated gap countries. So it's this, the Pentagon's new map. This is it. I don't know if you've ever seen this. Have you ever seen this?
The
Pentagon's new map.
Don't think so.
So you can see how,
Interesting.
Europe and Russia and China and India, Australia, South Africa, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, they're the integrated countries. So there'll be stability there. But the people living in these countries will have their freedoms restricted, will have no privacy, won't be able to travel, and will have no freedom of speech. But they will be able to eat and they'll be fine. Now, in the other countries, there will be famine, there will be constant war, constant destabilization, and resource extraction. And
So you mean the green areas are going to have that happen?
No, the green areas will be stable, but the citizens will have no freedom. So in the green areas, you will be safe. You will not, die. There'll be no famine. You'll get your food and you'll have some security, but you will trade that security for all freedoms. So there'll be no freedom of speech, no freedom of travel, nothing. Now in the red
Thomas
countries,
Barnett.
That's it, Barnett.
Yeah.
That's the name, Barnett. He's the one that came up with this. And in the red countries, there will be constant upheaval, chaos, war, and it'll be deliberate chaos, because if there's chaos, people can't organize themselves, they can't resist. So there will be no functioning governments, there'll be constant upheaval, civil wars, famine, invasion, and resource extraction, because companies can go in and take and mine and drill and whatever with their paramilitaries, but there'll be no unified opposition. No one will be able to fight and protect the resources, because they're all just fighting and waging war on each other. And these people in the non-integrated countries will then migrate to the integrated green countries. And again, like I said, there'll be no freedom, blah, blah, blah. And then you're gradually replacing the white people for, people from all over the world. And when you do that, when you have a mix everywhere, then you don't have any sovereign national loyalty anymore. There's no loyalty to America because people are from all over the place. So now you can have regions like the New World Order. You'll have a North American technate, you'll have a European area, you'll have an Oceania area. And then effectively you get a one world government. Countries are forgotten.
Right.
Countries are over. It's all just, that's what you're dealing with. So, and there's a lot of people have talked about this, but this is a real Pentagon plan, by the way. The non-integrated country business.
Yeah, I remember seeing Thomas Barnett talk about this a few years ago, and I thought he was giving a warning at first, like if we don't watch out, this could happen. But perhaps it's the desired goal that they're working toward, as you say.
I think that was his desired goal. So I think that was definitely his desired goal, from what my understanding. So if you look in Thomas Barnett's framework, the world is divided into functioning core and the non-integrating gap. The core represents countries deeply integrated into the globalized economy, while the gap consists of countries disconnected from the system, often characterized by instability and lack of economic development. And it's deliberate. And it was his thesis, the Pentagon's new map argues that the US military should focus on integrating the gap countries into the core. So, whatever they say, they mean the opposite. So the whole point is constant chaos. The whole point is constant upheaval, because when you've got what they did look what they've done to Libya. So let's just take that. You had a functioning state. Everybody had free housing. There was no tax, free education, free health. And now look at Libya. It's ruled by two different warring factions. There's instability. There was raping and pillaging and open slave markets. Does that sound stable? Look at Syria. You've got a fundamentalist group of people in there, lots of different bands. The north is taken by Turkey. The south is now taken by Syria. The west The East is occupied by America and the oil fields. They've fragmented and totally destabilized Syria. Look at Iraq. They did the same. The north is now Kurdish. They don't get on well with the rest of the Shiites. And it's just all a mess. And the whole point is break up all these countries, get rid of any notion of nationalism, have everybody divided and infighting, and then you can exploit them and take advantage of them. It's that simple.
Yeah, you're right. And when you hear about a one world government, people always think, well, it's just going to be someone like Klaus Schwab or the World Economic Forum, and that's who's controlling this. But when you look at the writings of Redacted, and for example, in the UN, they have a division or a section on the Noahide laws. They're trying to advance the Noahide laws for the whole world through the UN. And what they say is that we will have a world government, but it will be run from Jerusalem. And so the question is, are these global governments that are talked about by Thomas Barnett and by the WEF and by Rockefeller for years saying we need a one world government?
Yeah.
Are those conceptions different from what we're hearing is being planned by redacted military intelligence for who's going to run it and from where? So I don't have all the answers, but something I think about. And one thing I'll mention too is with this war in Iran, the minute Iran is brutalized by the U.S., Russia and China have an obligation under BRICS, from what I understand, to join in. And they apparently already are supplying munitions. And that could be devastating. I mean, we could see millions killed.
I know. So I just want to show you another thing. Have you come across this? So this is from brown.edu, Brown University. And it's the new Middle East. And if you look, it's the Balkanization of basically the Middle East. So Pakistan, a big chunk of it is given over to Afghanistan. Balochistan is now free Balochistan. So you've got the Sindh province and Punjab connected, but you lose the northwest frontier and the Balochistan. Afghanistan and Balochistan take bits of Iran. So Iran is actually much smaller now. If you look at the Iranian coast, here is now the Arab Shia state, going all the way down the Saudi coast. UAE and Kuwait and Qatar remain the same, Oman state, but Yemen eats into Saudi. The Saudi homelands are separate, the Islamic sacred state. Jordan, you get Greater Jordan. Syria, they haven't shown here, but these are all different maps that are out there, and people want to, maybe redacted, want to break up big countries that may form an opposition to them, and you balkanize them and weaken them, and you turn these ancient, multi-ethnic, multi-religious cultures into a monolithic kind of thing where, one religion, one ethnicity. And it's quite sad because I think, Syria, for example, is thousands of years old, beautiful ancient civilization. The first Christians were there, the churches, you got all the different religions and everything. And now they've just, one of the biggest things that the war in the Middle East has done is punish the Christians there. They've been persecuted and they've all fled. And, no one in the West talks about this. None of these Christian Zionists talk about how the poor Christians in the Middle East, not by the original people in those Arab lands, these are Arab Christians as well, but by the very people that are being supported by redacted and American intelligence. We in the West and MI6 fund the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda. We give them the money, the intel, everything, their weapons, literally. And then this radicalized group of people who are so far from Islam is unbelievable, go killing and, more Muslims actually than any other group, but also the Christians. And all the resulting upheaval and instability means that everybody migrates out and flees. Wouldn't you do that? I mean, of Anybody would do that. I mean, at the end of the day, why are Americans, why did your ancestors move to America? Because somewhere back home, things were not good. Either the Irish were being kicked out of Ireland from a manufactured famine. Maybe they were being persecuted there. Maybe there were religious groups being persecuted in Europe. Maybe there were wars in Europe. And people left and migrated because they wanted security. They wanted a better life. And the people coming to Europe and America are no different. They just want an end to the bombs and the instability and the terrorism. And they think, well, we're being told to come here. The NGOs are telling us we can come here and they give us everything we need. So they're only doing what everyone else would do. They're escaping instability and chaos and violence and seeking shelter in a place where they perceive they can find it. That's what's happening. But the problem is right-wing pundits only talk about the invasion of the Muslim hordes and the barbarians at the door, at the gate, and how Islam is a backward religion and we need to send them back and we need to support Israel and Judeo-Christian values. What these right-wing pundits never ever talk about is the war machine, the military-industrial complex, redacted, the role of the NGOs and the UN, and the manufacturing of this crisis. They'll never, ever talk about that.
Yeah, you're right. And certainly not the immigrants' fault for fleeing war to come to a better place like the United States. You know, this invasion, I had written a couple of articles about J.J. Carroll, who was a former Customs and Border Protection agent and officer who, you know, you'll hear Trump say 10 million illegals came in under Biden. It's actually between 30 and 45 million, apparently.
What?
Yeah, it's in a massive amount. And he has the figures. There's one interview done by Clayton Morris. He has that YouTube channel called Redacted, where he shows a clip of J.J. Carroll, who was on for an interview, discussing one of the Biden administration's contract administrators. And she was responsible for writing the checks to a lot of the NGOs, including Catholic Charities, Jewish Family Services, HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society. And she said we were writing $100 million checks with no audits. These were for buying planes and Mercedes buses and things to ship people in. But the thing is, they were doing it. I mean, of course, people who are fleeing war, as you mentioned, we have compassion for and we feel terrible and we want to help them. But the Biden administration or whoever was controlling them were literally pushing an invasion. I mean, there were a lot of criminals. Trump talks about it, but it's probably even worse than he describes. I mean, Venezuela and other countries literally were emptying some of their prisons to send people here. And the thing is, when Trump said, we're going to do mass deportations to get the illegals out, and then we can have them come back in, or if they self-deport, they're able to come back in as long as they go through the legal routes. Those deportations have been very minimal. I mean, probably on the order of a few thousand compared to the, you know, over 30 million that came in under Biden. So it's,
wow. That's
the
horrific.
NGOs. Yeah. So what Biden did with paying the NGOs billions, both for COVID propaganda and COVID policies, like the medical societies we talked about, and for migration or border invasions, you could call it, was just astonishing. And I know, like, Elon Musk's Doge uncovered some of that, but it seems to just be a fraction of what was going on. And even Elon says that. He says the abuse, the fraud and abuse and waste was unfathomable.
So what do you think is going on with Elon and Trump, right? Is Elon with the Baphomet suit, the tech bro, what is he all about?
That's a great question.
I can't figure him out. Sometimes I think he's a good guy. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes so many of his tweets, I'm like, yeah, dude, 100%. He goes, you know, there's not too many people in the world. We need big families. We need to, I love all that stuff.
Yeah.
But then he's also pro-vaccine. And I'm like, what the frack? Then it seems like he's a technocrat with his brain chips and his Neuralink. I'm so tortured by this man. Like, you know, I don't understand him. And then you've got Trump, who just seems to be in the pocket of redacted. You know, what I'm saying is, you've got this fruit tree that doesn't seem to bear any fruit. You know, they say all the right things, but they don't actually do the right things. And now the way he's acting with Iran, I'm really disappointed in that. I'm really disappointed he's not stopped the mRNA shots. You know, he was standing next to that guy in the White House. What's his name? The old man with the plastic surgery and the tech guy, the Oracle man. He's talking about 500.
Larry Ellison.
That's it. He's talking about 500 billion for cancer vaccines and this and that. I mean, what the hell is going on here? Like, this is BS, but a lot of people just have this blind love and loyalty to Trump. They think he's almost like the Messiah, but he's doing a lot of things that are really not good. But I understand he says a lot of things that are good as well. He might be doing some things that are good. I don't know about that, but it's just so murky and mixed. And I just wonder, is that part of the operation to keep people just completely wrong-footed and confused because they just don't know where to stand? Like, you know, Biden, you just knew he was going to be a tyrant. Kamala was going to be a tyrant. But with Trump, you're just always second-guessing, and you end up just saying, no, we have to trust him because he's doing all these right things. He's saying these things that are right. But mRNA shots aren't being cancelled, you know?
Yeah, you have the exact same reaction that I do here in the U.S. to those guys, Elon and Trump. There's times where I think, that's great that they just said that. And it looks like they're going to go for the protection of the citizens after all. And then they switch over. You know, with Elon, I've always admired him. There are people who say, oh, it's all staged and he's not really the one, you know, he's not the true founder of Tesla and so forth. But he certainly has been a major force behind it. I mean, the guy is definitely brilliant. And I mean, everyone who works with him says his engineering skills are great. But like on the issue of buying Twitter, he was originally he said, I'm going to let everyone back on whose speech was legal. You know, so if it's illegal, like obscenity or copyright infringement, then of course we can't allow that. But everything else is going to be allowed. And then he instantly got attacked by Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL. And they started boycotting the advertisers of Twitter. And Elon said, I lost something like 60%, at the time, it's a couple of years ago, 60% of the value of Twitter in a short period of time, and the stock price has fallen some large percent. He said, I'm going to sue the ADL for defamation and the resulting damages that they've caused by this false accusation of anti-Semitism. And he worked that all out, in part by going with Ben Shapiro to Auschwitz. And after he came back, he implemented some of these censorship policies with his CEO, Linda Yaccarino. And what it amounts to is, and he said, you know, freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. Like, I had, I think, 7,600 followers on Twitter, which is not that much, like 3 years ago. Then I got suspended for talking about the vaccine with peer-reviewed research and let back on. And since then, last couple of years, I'm down like 200 followers. My follower count has not increased. It's only decreased in a couple of years. Now, that may be just because I have very boring content or not interesting content. It might be my fault, but it takes away one's motivation. I'm not motivated to write on Twitter the way I used to during the pandemic, where I was putting all the research into tweets. And now I know, since I'm in a little echo chamber and siloed, I'm not motivated to do that. So Elon, on the speech issue, says a lot of good things, but the actions show that it's controlled by redacted. One can pretty safely say, according to his own statements about who's controlling advertisers, who's telling him to shadow ban, and so forth. The difference is now he seems to be on board with it. Like, he gave a speech saying, yeah, it's good that we're going to limit one's reach. Now, that could be true if it's very terrible content, like if somebody is just talking about killing or something, which is itself illegal, incitement to violence. That's one thing. But if you're just talking about some of these political issues or medical issues, the fact that you need to be, you know, I'll have a tweet that used to get, let's say, 1,000 views in a day. I'll get like 100 views or 10 views or something ridiculous. So I'm just not motivated. But on Trump, same thing. He'll said a lot of things during the campaign that gave one hope. However, he did say a few concerning things, which is that he's going to put anti-Semites to death, bring back the death penalty for anti-Semites. Now, I hope he was referring to violent criminals in Hamas. That could be seen as justifiable. But the way he phrased it was like anyone who criticizes any policy of what certain people want to do is going to be considered an anti-Semite. I mean, if you look at the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which was adopted by the U.S. Congress, it's outrageous. I mean, it basically says if you say that, now some of it makes sense. If you lump all people into one category and say they're all responsible, of course that's bad. That's poor reasoning and it's inappropriate. But the idea that you can't conduct research on certain things, like you can't look at certain historical events. They may make it illegal to look at 9/11 and some of the things Christopher Bolin has researched and Heinz Palmer. And that will just really be un-American to take away people's ability to think.
What about criticism of Israel? Does that fall into that as well?
It shouldn't. All Supreme Court cases on the First Amendment would indicate that you should be free to criticize any person or nation.
But that's in the IHR thing, isn't it? Because that's ridiculous. That's a government.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that criticizing Zionism is considered anti-Semitic.
That's ridiculous.
I know. And I don't know about criticizing Israel, whether that's in the definition. I'm not sure. That would be going a bridge too far, I think, if they expressly said that. But the effect seems to be the same. And again, I love the Israeli people. I'm not sitting out here trying to be a beacon of being against any country, but I am for the First Amendment, and I don't want to see any Americans' right to think or write.
Can I just show you something? So this is a really great group that I've followed for quite a long time. Jewish Voice for Peace. And there's our approach to Zionism. It's guided by a vision of justice, equality, and freedom for all people. We unequivocally oppose Zionism because it is counter to those ideals. We know that opposing Zionism or even discussing it can be painful, can strike at the deepest trauma and greatest fears of many of us. Zionism is a 19th century political ideology that emerged at a moment where Jews were defined as irrevocably outside of a Christian Europe. European anti-Semitism threatened and ended millions of Jewish lives in pogroms, in exile, and in the Holocaust. Through study and action, through deep relationship with Palestinians fighting for their own liberation, and through our own understanding of Jewish safety and self-determination, we have come to see that Zionism was a false and failed answer to the desperately real question many of our ancestors faced of how to protect Jewish lives from a murderous anti-Semitism in Europe. So, and they talk about it, how it's a settler colonial movement, an apartheid state. They get it. Jewish Voice of Peace. The problem is Redacted won't promote this kind of voice in social media. You won't hear of these people. And they represent a lot of good Jews, by the way. That's the problem. You won't, Redacted will not have that publicized. You won't hear about them.
Right. And while we're on the topic, one of the things that strikes me is, and I virtually never talk about Zionism because I'm not educated enough to really talk about it with any, knowledge. But you hear different definitions of what Zionism is. You hear it range from the right of the Jewish people to exist or the right of the Jewish people to have a homeland, which is very reasonable. Seems like no one can oppose that, to, it can range from that to this movement that you just described on that site, where it's Theodor Herzl and the movement that arose after that, which is more of a political ideology. And that's what Jeffrey Sachs says. He says, and this is him talking, Zionism does not represent Judaism because it's on this conquest, this world conquest that is brutal. That's Sachs. I don't want people to think I'm saying that because it could be misconstrued. But so the problem is when someone says I don't like the political ideology, they get accused of saying, I don't want certain people to exist or have a homeland. And so that seems to be a little bit of a rhetorical trick that is played. And so that's one of the reasons I don't talk too much about it, because instantly people can say, oh, you're saying you don't want certain people to live? Of course not, so that's why it's fraught with issues. And I think that's intentional. Like you said, it kind of creates chaos and paralysis. People don't want to even approach this issue. And I understand why. I usually don't either. But, here we're talking about it.
I think there's a really simple answer. One country for all people, United States of Israel and Palestine. Everybody just lives happily. Little government, decentralized, no special treatment for any one group. Everyone live in peace and harmony. A lot of people say, well, that's not possible. There's so much bad blood. Yeah, you take the government out of it, trust me. You take the agitators, the bad people out of it. Most people just want to live in peace and harmony. It's very doable. It's very doable. Anyway, listen, I've taken up a lot of your time. Thank you so much, James. I mean, I think there's just so many parallels with COVID and all the other nonsense that we're seeing. In summary, there's a lot of censorship going on. There's a lot of no-go areas. Can't question the science. Can't question vaccine safety. Can't question redacteds. I don't know even how to describe it. Unusual influence over US government and Western governments, and their influence, and dragging America into things that are not in America's interest. Yeah. Anyway, is there anything you want to say that you haven't mentioned?
Well, first of all, it's great to speak with you live and great to have this discussion. And I really appreciate it. And I think we covered a lot, but there's many more things we could talk about maybe next time. Okay. I also want to thank you for standing up for the truth and for your patience these years. And it's greatly appreciated by millions of people. So we really appreciate what you've done and for what you're doing now. Yeah, thank you.
Well, listen, my final question of the day, my friend, that I ask all my guests is, imagine you're on your deathbed. You're very comfortable, so don't worry about that. But you're about to meet your maker. And before you do, you've got all your loved ones around you, your children, your grandchildren, your wifey, everybody. Like, before you pass on, what words of wisdom or advice are you going to tell everybody?
Be a good person. Stick to your values. Be good to your word, as you said. And persevere. Things can be difficult, but we have to persevere.
Great. James, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Malik. Really appreciate it.
Sorry, just as we're wrapping up, it always is the case. You mentioned something about COVID-33, and I'm like, what the heck? So this is bonus content for the people who've listened to the outro music. I've hung on to the bitter end. I freaking love you guys. Right, tell me, James, what's this about COVID-33?
Sure. During COVID, there was this emphasis on the number 33 in announcing COVID cases, deaths, and related topics like that. So I have an article on this, which I can send you, that shows how all these governors and prime ministers, when they were first announcing COVID in 2020, were saying there are 33 deaths in Macon, Georgia, or there's 33 new cases in California, the California governor. And they're all saying 33 down the line. And it was just very strange. And 33 has some significance in Freemasonry, where the 33rd degree Freemasons are supposedly the top order of that. And there's also this symbolic representation of 21. There was a mention of 21 throughout COVID. And in fact, there's a Pfizer commercial with Martha Stewart where she is wielding a sword and she chops a pineapple, the crown of a pineapple off, and says the new COVID Omicron booster is, going to wipe out, bring protection or something. And she's got 21 pots hanging over her head in a kitchen that are shown at the beginning of the commercial. And then she does the thing. And so a lot of people have said this represents Noahide law decapitations and the 21st order Freemasons who are supposed to be Noahide executioners. Now, I don't know if this is the case, but that's what the symbolism is purportedly about. So even though a lot of these things don't have actual power, I mean, I don't think there's any kind of power behind a lot of these so-called paranormal things like numerology and astrology and so forth. A lot of people think there's power behind it, and that can have a psychological effect when they're believing something and they alter their behavior based on it. So, yeah, I'll send you those articles.
So what I would say to that is I hate the Freemasons. I've had my run-in with the Freemasons at work. They're not nice people. And they're very dangerous, actually. And there's a lot of Freemasonry in medicine and judiciary and the police. They all look after each other. And I think a lot of the time the low-level people are just good people. But they give themselves contracts. They take care of each other. Fundamentally, I'm with RFK. I don't believe in secret societies. Bullshit, that. But so I've been the biggest, outspoken person about Freemasonry. I'm like, I do not like it at all. I even came across an account on X, at the time it was Twitter, where some guy was talking about Freemasonry and posting comments on mine. I was like, oh yeah, I'm with you. I hate Freemasonry. So I thought one day I'll just check out this guy's account. He's posted on my account. Oh, it's the Freemasons and this and that. I was like, all right, yeah, I agree with that. Let's check it out. So I'm going down, I'm like, oh my God, is that person a Freemason? Oh my God, look at that. Yeah, they're doing that funny hand signal, funny handshake or whatever. I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'm going down going, yeah. Like this guy, yeah, I'm like, I'm going to follow this guy. He's got a lot of good stuff on it. And suddenly, the 10th post down, it's Doc Malik. He goes, Doc Malik is Freemason. Look at this video clip, 1 minute, 33 seconds. I'm like, what? Is this taking the piss? Hold up. You're accusing me of Freemason? I was like, what the fuck? Then I scroll down, there's another one of me. If you look at this one is another Freemason gesture or whatever. I'm like, what?
Oh, yeah. The
So
gestures.
suddenly I'm being accused. And then he's like, oh, look, this interview with Bob Moran. Bob Moran did the funny handshake. I don't want to do it, but it's kind of like the Donald Trump thing. Bob Moran was talking to me. He goes, Bob Moran is a Freemason and Doc Malik's a Freemason. They're having a Freemason job. I'm like, what? And at that point, I thought, do you know what? This is all bullshit. The problem is there is a lot of Freemasonry out there, but sometimes it's just random coincidences. And
Exactly.
And you cannot, just because there's and if you add certain numbers and divide it by certain numbers and multiply by, you'll come out with 33. Like, it's like, mathematical jugglery, and you go, see, it's 33. It's like, no.
Exactly.
Like, I literally just cropped a clip at 1 minute, 33 seconds, not even realizing it was 1 minute, 33 seconds. It was just, that was the snippet that I wanted, and I published it. I didn't even know it was 1 minute, 30. I don't look at these things. So I'm just a bit careful when it comes to symbolism. And take, for example, they talk about people covering up one eye. I'm not going to do it because people screenshot it and go, see, it's
right, exactly.
But, so, just demonstrating to you. But, like, if you cover up your one eye or whatever, I'm convinced a lot of these people, these celebrities and people, are at the photo shoot. And I've been there, and the camera guy is just shouting orders at you. Turn your body to the right and look to your left. Turn to your left and look to the right. Head, chin down, head up. Put your hands over here. And you know what? They're doing that. Bang, bang, snap, 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 snap. All right, cover your right eye. They cover the right. Snap, snap, cover your. So the photographer might be in it. But
no doubt about it.
The sports person, the musician, the whatever, they're just doing what they're being told. So,
exactly.
I don't think everyone's Freemason. I don't think it's. I don't know. I feel like we need to be careful. But anyway, this is another thing I wanted to ask you. Because now you're talking about Freemasonry. I don't know how valid this is. I've seen this quite a lot. Albert Pike apparently said a third world war will occur between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided onto this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, economic exhaustion. It's kind of terrifying.
It is.
Do you think there's some validity in that?
Well, so what I have heard a lot of rabbis talk about, and I post articles on this every now and then, I posted one this week, is that the goal of what they say is there's prophecies in the Talmud and in the Torah, because the Talmud's kind of a disquisition of principles in the Torah, the Old Testament, that Edom, which they say is represented by America and Europe, must fight Ishmael, which is Arabs and Muslims, mutually destroy each other. But that initially, and so there's several ways they describe this. One is Persia versus Rome. Rome is supposed to be Europe and America, they say. And Persia, they used to say it's only Iran, but now they say it's a combination of Iran and Russia. And there's some rabbis from Chabad Lubavitch who are explaining this in some videos on YouTube, which I put up on Substack. And they say during this fight, where you're going to see Iran and Russia versus Europe and America, Iran and Russia are going to win. And China will probably join as well. They're going to win. That's the claim from these scriptures. And again, I'm not actually a religious person at all. I'm just going by who out there is influential for our leaders. I mean, these rabbis who talk about what they have planned or what the prophecies claim, and I don't believe it's real prophecy like God's bringing it about. I believe men are bringing this about. And they're saying it's God bringing it about through the prophecies, when in actuality it's people. But a lot of the believers, Christians, etc., believe it. They think, oh, this is God's will that America gets defeated, which makes them passive and accept this, which is dangerous. But according to these prophecies, it's supposed to be the Arab and Muslim world against the Europeans. And, they call the Europeans and Americans either Edom or Esau, or sometimes Amalek. One time I published a rabbi saying that America and Europe are Amalek, because, you heard Netanyahu say that was the Palestinians or Hamas in Gaza, and that they needed to be destroyed according to the scripture. So he's using religious justifications for the war because he knows a lot of people are going to recognize that and see it as justification. But so somebody wrote into Substack and said, no, Amalek is not Europe. It's these other people. I don't know. I'm no biblical scholar, but I just know what the rabbis who are very influential on our leaders are saying. And so if they're saying this, then it's a concern. So the guy I just put up this week, who's a rabbi, said during this war that's coming up, everyone's thinking, Iran might be defeated or et cetera. But really who's going to be defeated is America and Europe. And he's using this scripture to justify this. So I think it's just worthy of consideration.
Yeah, well, Netanyahu definitely referenced.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, he definitely referenced it. And if you look, it says the Prime Minister's office added a citation to his written and translated remarks to indicate Netanyahu was quoting from the book of Deuteronomy or whatever. Both stories call for the Israelites to completely eliminate their attackers and blot out the memory of Amalek from under the heaven. And then if you keep going on, there's somewhere, he goes, there, Netanyahu, you must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible. And then Fidel goes, speaking Hebrew, he's comparing Hamas to the nation of Amalek in a passage from the book of Samuel. That passage says to smite the Amalekites after the nation launched a vicious surprise attack on the Jewish people. The biblical commandment is to completely destroy all of Amalek. And when I'm talking about completely destroy, we're talking about killing each and every one of them, including babies, including their property, including the animals, everything.
That's right.
It's kind of crazy.
Yes. Absolutely.
I mean, I don't know about you, but this is absolutely freaking terrifying. Do you not think so?
It is. No, it is. And in fact, people have said, you used to write just about vaccines and medical issues. Why are you bringing in this other stuff? What I'm trying to do in some of my articles on Substack is set the record straight. Like, people are saying there's no such thing as DNA these days. So I wrote an article saying, no, there is DNA. Here's the evidence. A lot of people are saying there's no such thing as viruses. And I know some of these people are sincere. They really believe that there are no viruses. But other people are probably just sowing discord and trying to be confusing.
It's a psyop.
Yeah.
It's a psyop.
Absolutely.
I also think
right.
there might be nanotech. I also think there might be nanotech. Yeah, I'm being serious. I'm open to it.
We know it exists, whether it's in the vaccines. I know there are a lot of people like Dr. Anna Maria Michalczyk who says there's nanotech in the vaccines. And
Suzanne Humphries, David Nixon.
David Nixon. Yeah, I didn't know Suzanne Humphries said that. That's interesting.
Yeah. She's done some blood work and she's done her own slides and she's shared it with Catherine Austin Fitz, and it looks pretty scary, man.
Kevin McCaird is also analyzing people's blood. I have some friends who are asking him to analyze it, and he's taking the amyloid clots and looking for those. And those are pretty awful. They're not just regular thromboses. They're amyloid. But then I started to write about, if our leaders are doing these things that don't make sense, like they're allowing 30 plus million illegals in, who are many of them criminals, and cartel members, why could this be? And then you look at who's influencing Biden. You look at the people around Biden when this was happening, and look at the people around Trump. And many of them are good people. Like, I like a lot of the people around Trump. They sound like good people, like Stephen Miller. But on the other hand, there's folks behind the scenes who are in the administrations who are pushing these things. I mean, Mayorkas is an example. He was actually not behind the scenes. He was front and center as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. And he was deliberately lying to Congress about, he had a CBP-1 app that was a phone app that would allow the illegals to just walk right in. They could make an appointment with the Border Patrol and just skate in, and they would get an appointment like in 7 years or 8 years. In the meantime, they could just skate in. So this guy was undermining. You mentioned traitors. I think if there was anyone who's a possible traitor based on his actions, Mayorkas might be one. I'm not. Oh, Mayorkas, Alejandro Mayorkas. He was the director of HIAS, which is the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which is one of the NGOs that was paid apparently billions to effectuate this.
So this is what I mean.
And
who's paying them billions? Where are the billions coming from?
Well, part of it's taxpayer money for sure. Part of it might have been the extra money that was printed by the Federal Reserve during COVID. And
So I mean,
part of it may be,
someone's art designing it and orchestrating this, and this is what I want to figure out. Who is it? Driving me nuts.
Absolutely.
Because if you can't figure out who the enemy is, you can't take them out. You need to take these people out.
And, you know, Mayorkas was criticized in Congress by Senator Josh Hawley, who said, how can you use this app to just let these people come in unvetted? He said, you should resign. You know, he was very angry at him. And Mayorkas defended himself by saying, I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. And so don't you dare question my pedigree and don't you dare question my background. So that gave him, in many people's minds, a get out of jail free card. Like, yeah, whatever you want to do, you want to invade the country, you know, based on your background, you should be able to do it, is what some people thought.
I need to wrap up. My wife's going out for work dinner. I need to look after the kids. Much love. Thank you so much.
Great talking with you.
Fascinating
Likewise.
chat.